they get to the map that you made. That's what's called My Maps in Google Maps. So you can easily move from here, from your basically your own offline data onto the Google Maps and make that available either through a selected audience or through, it's called unlisted, you can make it accessible to everyone so that these maps will show up in search results. So if I decide to publish this map of VCT sites, anybody who searches for HIV testing in Laos is likely to come up with this map in Google Maps, one of those small maps that you can then go into and look at the details. They'll see who created it, when it was done. I'll show some of that later on. Another advantage is that we now have access to much more detailed base maps. Base maps being streets and roads and points of interest and these satellite images. As many of you know, you can switch from a simple map view or street view to the satellite images, to Google Earth view. And before, what happened a lot with the type of mapping that we were doing was we'd have a bunch of dots in the middle of nowhere, like this is in Blantyre, for those of you who are familiar. I pointed out the PSI office. This is the center of town. It's like one road going vaguely through, which is probably not even correct. And so this is in Health Mapper, which is a tool that we've been using a lot for mapping out our map data and looking at access to condoms, for example. And because we're in this partnership with Google, they told us actually you can download some of our own base maps and use that in your own systems. So the orange lines, this is what we get through the Google data. And this is data that was generated by anybody can digitize streets, go look at that satellite image and name a street, tell directions, say whether it's a dual lane or whether it's one-way street and so on. And it just helps us to, first of all, in terms of quality control, when we map out our places. A lot of the time, if I'm in a setting like this, I have no idea whether this point, maybe it has wrong coordinates, and that's why it seems to be off out of the center of town. But if I add my street maps, I'll see actually, yes, that is on a main road, and it does make sense that it's out there. Or by just plotting your data on Google Maps, you'll find, like in Laos, that one of our pharmacies just fell in the middle of a rice field, which is, and again, then by double checking the original questionnaire, we found that, well, actually they entered one of the digits, and instead of entering a 7, it was a 1. So that's what explained the reason. But these things wouldn't come up if you don't have proper reference materials, reference maps like these ones. And then you see all the gray dots. These are typical points of interest. So this is in the downtown, the CBD in Blantyre, Mount Soche Hotel, one of the bigger hotels. You see the restaurant, but the gray dots, it ranges from schools and health facilities to government buildings, Moonlight funeral homes, immigration office. So all these things, landmarks, can all be integrated and incorporated in your own mapping systems. So that in itself has been very useful in many cases, and really, like I said, helps us to check the accuracy of our data and make nicer maps, because just having dots in the middle of nowhere, as we see in many map reports, is not as nice as actually being able to better relate to the data and to really see where they are. So that's one added, a bonus, as I would say, in this case. And it's been very useful in many cases. Now, anybody familiar with GIS? Health Mapper, ArcView, MapInfo, there's lots of tools out there. Now, sometimes I get the question, well, do we still need this stuff, the fancy technical, the more complicated GIS software? Health Mapper, we struggle with it. ArcGIS, it's expensive, or we don't have anybody who's been trained. But the answer is yes, because they kind of complement each other. There's different things that you do with Google Earth and Google Maps and a more traditional GIS. So maybe just because it's often a bit confusing, Google Earth, Google Maps, MapMaker, just to list like their main applications and values here in this case. Well, Google Earth is really a map viewer. It's not an analysis tool. You wouldn't be able to look at access rates or to do some spatial analysis with it, but you can view your own data. It's very easy to use. It's free. You install it locally. You do need an internet connection, so you combine your own data with an online database that's somewhere up there in the cloud, in the Google servers. So you do need your internet connection, and you can easily import your data from Excel and a number of other formats. then Google Maps is its online counterpart. So that's purely on, you only need an internet connection and a web browser. It's an online searchable map, so that's really what gives people access to the information. And as I said, if you do a simple Google search on hotels in DC, one of the things that will come up is that little Google map. The same, whether it's health facilities or pharmacies or any other types of points of interest. It's possible to add your own data points and share them with others, or even in a way that they become part of that big Google mapping database. That's through Google MapMaker, which is all about crowdsourcing and community mapping. It's a moderated online system, so if somebody adds, like me, if I add the PSI Rwanda office in Kigali, presumably somebody who knows about Kigali will have to validate that and say, okay, that looks right, and it's not just some spam or not just somebody mapping out their own house. It seems to make sense, so they'll validate that. In turn, that will become accessible through Google Maps, and it could take a few days or a few weeks, but on a regular basis, Google moves data that's being generated by its users from MapMaker to Google Maps. And this is open in, not so much in Europe and North America, but for most African, Asian countries, anybody can go on there and add these points of interest, digitize streets, and gradually they've been building up a very detailed and comprehensive database for these countries, because commercial data is simply not available. Here, anybody can buy teleatlas data in Europe, or I don't know what the equivalent is here, but all these data sets, the streets, the roads, they all exist already. Google has bought them. There, they rely on their users to gradually make this information as complete as possible. As I mentioned on Google Maps, you can, all you need, well, is an internet connection, a Google account. You can decide who has access to your data. It's like on invitation only or available to anyone. And you can, again, import from Excel and upload your own data straight away. A more traditional GIS, what's the main purpose of that? It's really much more comprehensive, and it's all about processing, managing, and analyzing your data, making nice thematic maps, of course, but it's, you know, if you're only making just maps that show points or population or something like that, you could probably do that with Google Earth. But if you want to do something slightly more advanced and combine two data sets and look at the proportion of sex workers that are within a given radius of condom outlets, for example, you really need still your traditional GIS, because that's not possible. There are no tools to do that in Google Earth. But so, of course, on the other hand, they're much more complex and require more training, and often they're more expensive as well. So I have to say that ArcGIS, which is the main, that's the main mapping software, the main GIS